Knowing and Believing, episode 3 with special guest Shawn Brace to try and do a 10-second recap of what this is, working from materialist, almost atheist point of view towards believing through working towards bringing religious lexicon into the intellectual toolbox, actually bringing in words that mean things that we can agree on their meaning and both hold them as true, starting from an almost atheistic point of view to getting to a point to believe. And that's kind of why we're doing this. You're a self-proclaimed believer and employed as a pastor, and someone who is intellectually not negligible.
That's a very high compliment.
Is not negligible.
I don't know if I deserve it, but yeah.
No, I've always appreciated your more thoughtful, and it seems like the roots go a lot deeper than surface level with you. So that's why I asked you if you do this, and I'm really stoked that you've left your wonderful home of Bangor that you've been for a long time, which I know has been hard, but welcome to Southern Maine.
Thank you, sir.
And Shawn is starting a church down here in the Portland area. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, go check out Shawn. Where can they find out about what you're doing?
They can't at this point.
All right. Eventually you will, depending on when this gets released.
That's right.
Which I'm
Stay
talking
tuned.
with Peter about, being Peter Wanamacher, about the one who's going to take these and just put the bookends on them and put them out there.
Nice.
That's the kind of thing he does.
Yeah.
I'd love to get him in here sometime too. He's so interesting to talk to.
Yeah, he is.
But
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. It'll all be tuning in.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm going to put my phone on silent.
You can look for me on Instagram.
There we go.
I'll probably post something there. Shawn Brace, just at Shawn Brace. Yeah.
Shawn Brace.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
SHAWN BRACE.
Not SEAN, SHAWN. And now for the recap of subjects that we've kind of covered in the first 2 episodes, we basically started with truth, dabbled through some concepts on words and the use of them and what they're for, moving from experience into an objectified auditory communication. So these auditory communications represent emotional states at their most basic level, the emotional state of perception of whatever it is you're thinking or interacting with. Theories on truth. Now, what's the evidence over up here that I'm holding?
Good question, Trent.
That was
we candidly, it's been a few weeks since we last recorded, so I'm trying to remember what we talked about.
It was a certain
last
type of theory or evidence that comes through experience, I believe.
Like empiricism. Is that what we talked about?
It was a name for a certain type of evidence that comes through experience.
Boy, we should
reference previous show notes, and maybe Tim will put it up there. But anyways,
it was really good, whatever it was.
Yeah, go back and watch that. But correspondence theory of truth, to go over those really quick, I think correspondence theory of truth is the only one that I really believe. Okay. Because correspondence theory, truth is when statements accurately reflect reality. Mm-hmm. So we have to use our ability to relate, our consciousness, to outline truth. I believe that's what our purpose is ultimately. Mm-hmm. The second theory of truth that I was given, coherence theory, truth is when statements are consistent with a system of beliefs. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time with this because if it makes preconceived ideology the determinator of truth rather than evidence, that can be very misleading. Mm-hmm. So if that's not true because I believe as Amish believe or Jews believe or how, that's pick and choose what you want and just make truth what you want it to be, that or what you believe it to be according to an ideology that's established outside of you, you're offloading your own responsibility for being conscious, in my opinion. Pragmatic theory, again, I don't get on board with this one either. Truth is defined by practical effectiveness and utility. Mm-hmm. I don't like this one as well because simply that something is useful should not make it true. If it's useful for me to reduce your emotional state to benefit me, I don't think it's true that is something that's pragmatic and good long term. So the pragmatic theory kind of runs up against the relative quality of good and bad, which again, truth is truth regardless of it being good or bad or useful or anything else. It is truth, and you cannot deny or look away from it, in my opinion. It has to be responded to.
I mean, I might be sympathetic to some degree with bits of all of these. You know, I think there's a lot of people who do resonate with that, especially last one. They're less concerned with, is it true? And more concerned with, does it work? You know?
Right. But it could work, but be the wrong or a bad thing for other people and good for you. Even still, it's pragmatic.
Yeah. But I don't know that we can separate like objective truth from practical results, right? Like
Sure. But to say that, to define something as true simply because it's pragmatic is not enough for me.
Yeah, it might be enough for me. I don't know.
But I still feel like that's me determining what true is based on its benefit to me.
I hear that. But all I'm saying is, on some level, there's going to be some subjectivity. I am a subject.
It all comes through subjective means.
Yeah.
Well, you can't escape that, which gets down to our first part of this conversation, I believe we had on the first episode, where the bilateral, the two balancing characters of God that basically everything agrees on is relationship and truth. And so you have to relate to truth. The character of God is embodied in us in both. I have an intellect, which is where I kind of collect truth, and I have a emotional subjective state where I bring in potential truth and put it into a corral that, you know, contains what I determine to be true. And according to these, I have to decide what is allowed to get into that corral. And if I'm going off of, well, this is pragmatic, so I'm going to continue to use it as true, I have to know, like, part of my issue with Adventism that made me step aside is that it benefited me but did not benefit someone who was born gay. And that for me feels selfish to stay in there and benefit from all the positive parts of it, but exclude others. I felt like that was disingenuous for me to jump in the lifeboat and keep other people out.
So I mean, I think your example there just kind of demonstrates kind of what I'm saying, is that if it doesn't work, then there might not be much value in it. So we can, all I'm saying is, I think if something is truly true, there is a pragmatic benefit. We can't separate. We cannot separate.
I think it's like aiming for happiness. If you aim for happiness, happiness is a byproduct of a process. So if you aim for the byproduct and don't go through the process, you get kind of a chemical reduction that'll give you cancer over time. So in the same sense, truth will be pragmatic, but to base it off of your perception of it being pragmatic is not enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
We're splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah, we're splitting hairs. So. Let's keep the wheels turning.
Last one, deflationary theory. Truth is simply affirming what a statement says without implying deeper properties. I think this is basically the most shallow version of kind of coherent to what I said. It doesn't seem to have a deeper sense of the kind of truth that we're looking at. Deflationary theory, anyways. The difference between words and numbers: words tell us about subjective emotional states largely, where numbers are a similar but different thing that tell us about material objective states. And the difference between those two is interesting, because you start to get your spiritual perception that material reality, you know, it starts to get into free will and determinism in a sense, in that you've got numbers that are just numbers. They're deterministic. They're not flexible, really. And then words are far more kind of not as accurate. So, so then we get to free will and determinism.
Here we are.
So, what is the best way to dip our toe into this? So the grade school perspective on free will and determinism, if we exist as, let's say, a chemical, electoral, biological bag of material, and we're simply a highly complex conglomeration of material relationship that has a degree of experiencing relationship. This consciousness is what it feels like when enough of material reality becomes highly interactive. Like we have cells doing stuff that we don't tell it to do. They're just doing it, and we can't help it, stop it, anything. It's just doing. Well, some people think you can, but so there's one level of thinking that's like you're the result of just a gobzillion amount of things coming together to then end up that you would automatically make this decision, which the argument then is like, all right, so we chose to do this podcast at 8 a.m. If we rewound the clock to the same time yesterday again, and all things being the same, the exact same thing would happen. We'd still end up here at 8, blah, blah, blah. Because all things being the same for a situation, every cell in the same place and everything else as it was, the same thing will happen. So everything is determined. And I'd like to hear from a religious side, like Baptists are, what do they call it?
Predestination.
Predestination.
I mean, many are.
Stuff like that. So from the religious perspective, what's the main take on free will and determinism, and where are the points of conflict strictly from like a religious disposition? And it's very interesting to me to think that like highly staunch religious people end up at determinism in some sense, just as a highly staunch atheist would. That's interesting. Like, what is your take on that?
Oh man, you're asking like a huge question, Trent. This has been debated for a long time. I just actually have a newsletter, shawnbrace.substack.com.
Oh, you have a Substack?
I do have a Substack. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to.
Your dad reads it with great interest. I think at least it's great interest. But I just wrote a piece called "In Defense of Calvinism." And
dang, you should have told me that yesterday. I would have read that.
All right, okay. So this has been a discussion for hundreds of years, arguably thousands of years.
Yeah.
Within theological and Christian circles particularly. And there are, within Christian thinking, at least within Protestantism, there are kind of typically two different camps, if you will. There's the Reformed Calvinist camp, and then there's the Arminian camp. And those are basically the two. Jacobus Arminius was a kind of a great critic of Calvin.
How would I have read that name and heard it in my head?
Arminianism? Arminian?
No,
Jacobus.
Yeah.
Arminius.
Arminius.
He was a Dutch theologian.
I'm hearing Jacobins. What is that?
Jacobins.
They have like a little floppy hat and are from the Middle Ages. I don't know. I'm relating it to that.
Yeah. No, not related. There was, maybe you're thinking of a political movement in Great Britain, but maybe not.
Okay. I'm writing down thoughts instead of interrupting.
No. So Calvin, his primary lens through which he kind of read the Bible and made sense of theology was the sovereignty of God. So God is sovereign over all, and he determines all. So he was very much a determinist.
Okay. Now, where do they pull that from, like verse-wise? Is there like, well, because it says this?
Yeah,
then...
there's like we could go through lots of verses that you could, I think, see that in Scripture. If you want to.
Yeah, without really understanding the trajectory front to back, you could walk away from like, we should worship on Sunday and we're determinists. Yeah. You could go that way.
Yeah.
You could basically go anywhere with it, in my opinion.
Which is another part of the discussion.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah. So now Luther was also probably a determinist on some level.
What do you think? Is that like determined, or is it an opinion? Or
no, it's fairly well documented.
Okay.
So that's one side of the coin. Now I'll return in a second to why I understand and appreciate what Calvin was trying to do in a second. But Arminius, he came along and rejected that framework. Because
I went running yesterday. Sorry.
Oh, good for you, man. Good. How far did you go?
We have cut a ton of motorcycle dirt bike trails around our property.
Yeah.
We've got about 2.1 miles now, and I went 3 miles with my youngest son.
You said, okay, yeah. You ran those, though.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know your son isn't slow.
No, I made him stay behind me though. It's too demeaning to just see this little guy just take off, and I'm like, ugh. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So Arminius, and I'm not an expert on any of these people. Let me just clarify that.
Enough to get us in trouble.
Enough to get us in trouble. Yeah, I'm not an expert on Calvin. I'm much less an expert on Arminius. But Arminius was very much concerned with the way that portrayed God's character. That so Calvin would say
the difficulty of evil at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is the age-old question of evil. Like, if there's evil in the world, if God determined it, what kind of being does that make him out to be?
That's a hard one.
Yeah. So Arminius, pushed back against the Calvinistic perspective, and from out of that, the most notable Arminians would be like those who come in the Wesleyan vein. So like Methodist.
The Wesleyan quadrilateral, I think, is actually a trilateral, in my opinion.
You think it's a trilateral? That's a very controversial take you've just given us.
Really? do a lot of people think that, or
no? Well, you maybe would be a good Anglican because Wesley came from Anglicanism, and they have like what they call a three-legged stool, which is scripture, reason, tradition.
What's the fourth one on the
experience?
Okay,
so that's the Wesleyan quadrilateral. The
scripture,
reason, tradition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, what's the trilateral? What do
that's what I'm saying.
What do they take out?
So they take out experience. So
that's horrible.
So
I'm not.
You're into the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Well, I would put scripture in experience.
Yeah.
Because it comes from experience. Mm-hmm. And it's just experience that we wrote down and all agree on.
Yeah. But they would they would presumably make a distinction between our ongoing experience and the authority of
that's a highly
somebody else's experience.
Conscientious position.
Which one?
What authority does their experience have more than our current experience?
You're saying the Bible. Like, what authority does the biblical writers' experience
There's
have?
a few things that God said and wrote with God's hand.
Yeah, presumably.
And that could be fit on like a few pages in that Bible.
Yeah.
The rest of it is people sharing what they think and what they've gone
through.
So
you're in favor of experience, tradition, and reason. You're not in favor of the scripture part.
I am. I just see it as, okay, you can say that. But I have to experience it in the way that you say and find it to be true to accept it, which still puts it as just some person telling me. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no special sauce in that person more than anything else other than the collective perception of it. It's no different than art, in my opinion, where one artist can do something that's highly beneficial for themselves, but it doesn't grab in the population because it's so unique to that person. Yeah. It doesn't pick up on the common experience, but the one that is picked up by the common experience becomes famous, and that artwork is well accepted. Yeah. In the same way, a spiritual perception, and you throw it out and it doesn't land well on anyone, no one's gonna make it holy. Yeah. We made it holy not because, God's self came down and advertised it, and everything we have is through human experience. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I agree with that on some level. I guess where I am, and this maybe we'll return to the question, what is the Bible in the future?
We're gonna go all over the place.
We're gonna go all over the place. But from my perspective, I would view the experience of the biblical writers as normative.
How so?
Well, they just and this is leaving aside the question of how I interpret the Bible. It's simply saying that I have, in my experience, I have observed that the writers of Scripture reflect some sort of authoritative experience.
So I can agree with you in that I've, similar to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier before we hit record, so we're not embarrassing ourselves too much. When I see the Garden of Eden story, and now that I've made it through and made it 22 years into marriage, I've spent 22 years getting to know the nature of the feminine, which is very different than the nature of the masculine. And it's not to say that they're less or should be controlled by. So weird. I'm not saying one is greater than. I'm saying they're a
but
balance.
Even the binary is controversial. But anyway, go ahead.
I'm fine with that. I have to say what I believe to be true through my experience. And if I don't, I'm cowering to an individual's will that is not, that has more of an agenda that might be a trajectory outside of truth. This is what the conscientious are highly laden with, is to have to say, I don't think this is true because we've been told. I'm saying, I don't think this is true because I've experienced. My experience is that when I try and treat my wife like she is me, that is too harsh, too rough.
Hasn't gone well for you.
No, that doesn't go well. What I found is the more I cherish, protect, provide for, and put boundaries on, like, you're not going to, be rudely take advantage of me or anything else. But if you need anything, sweetie, I'm here to provide it. I'll take care of it. I'll protect you. And I need you to tell me when I'm coming up short on the ways that I relate to people. There's so much that I have to learn from her that she has to help me with. And there's so much that I have to do for her, to provide for her, and to provide a space where she can be what she's meant to be. It's like how a culture does not develop art until it has security and consistency. So feminine is the art that we create in this relationship of marriage, in that I have to establish the boundaries of safety, and then what's inside those boundaries is the most valuable thing, our relationship and our home and where we raise our children. And she's not going to excel at that until I've excelled at what I do. Not to say that I have to excel first, but if I let my part down, she can't do her part. And if she's letting her part down, my part is useless.
So what you're saying is you find that the narrative of Genesis reflects, in your experience, some level of normativity.
So there's the experiential understanding of how masculine and feminine work to a 60-40 split. This is not a black and white issue. There's 60% of the time, if you take 100 people, 50-50 men and women, 60% of the time, the men you can guarantee will be more aggressive. 40% of those women will be more aggressive than a degree. So, everything's on a spectrum. And there's no hard and fast rules. I think this is where the conscientious get the idea from Scripture that women can't be pastors, is that typically women are far more relational to a 60-40 split.
And we would hate for pastors to be relational.
But at the same time, there's that difficulty of hard decision making, that when you're sensitive enough and involved enough and sensitive and perceptive enough, it can be hard to say, all right, I got to go take the shovel and cut the head off of that thing that we just ran over. It's not the wife that you're going to send out there to do that. Most of the time.
Maybe in my marriage it would be. But anyway.
I can get in trouble here. You can't. So from the creation story, I then see Eve as a representation of the feminine, and Eve is a representation of the masculine. And then we take the traditional, this is an old book. So there's a traditional view to it. We get that. Okay. So this is so interesting to me, and I listened to a podcast since our last one that really shed a lot of weird light on this, but we might have talked about this a little bit. But if you were to take the two books of the Bible or the two testaments, old, new. Old, highly conscientious. It's the whole thing about developing a people around law and being very litigious. New Testament, much more grace-oriented about relationship and love, more so. Not completely, obviously.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So the beginning of the Old Testament, the introduction of sin, what is that sin? That sin is an entering into experience, entering into relationship with the desire to understand the knowledge of good and evil. And that pull of relating to that is very dangerous. Very dangerous. And it's outlined in that whole story. And the danger in being attracted to that and not having your balance of the two together being the safest route, she wandered away and fell into danger, being deceived by a snake while looking to eat from a tree named the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We've never named trees like that before. Odd. So there's that I understand about the nature of our balancing of the sexes to be one more relational and one more hardened to be more of a tip of the spear to break the way so the more valuable things can come behind it, in a sense, right? And I see that in the creation story. If you look at the Bible as a trajectory of a human's life, when you start out, you have to be in an environment that's more conscientious because you don't know anything. You feel everything. And so you'll wander into all knowledge of good and evil to try and understand it, but you need some boundaries. So the sin at the formation of the Old Testament is a sin of openness, of wandering into experience. Now, the Band-Aid for that, or the cure for that, is a conscientious approach, one of establishing boundaries, norms, and traditions that train you to, when you get to a point, let's say 13 years old in the Jewish tradition, you then kind of transfer into, you've been nominalizing essentially into the person that you'll become, and now you're transitioning into denominalizing what you've been trained into, putting that back into the world. What denomination are you part of? I'm part of that. So Old Testament is like, going from youth, childhood into now becoming an adult. When you're an adult, you have to then, hopefully your character's been changed by beholding these traditions and laws and everything else. And then you operate more in grace after that. So then in the Old Testament, the introduction of sin is in the Garden of Eden, and it's a sin of openness that gets a conscientious Band-Aid for it to help it grow, right? Now, in the New Testament, the introduction of the major sin is the killing of the Son of God. That came about because of a highly conscientious sin. Now, it's very, very hard to understand or think of any conscientious behavior at all being wrong, because they're just trying to follow the laws and do what is right. But because they were so tied to that and the pride of understanding that and executing on that, they could not recognize the character of God standing in front of them as a person in Christ. So the sin at the introduction of the New Testament is a sin of conscientiousness that has a solution of openness, of love and relationship. And the balance of the two, so Christ is the objectification of God. So Christ standing, talking, existing, refers to himself as not love, but truth, the objectification of experience. Christ refers to God not in an objectified sense. Christ refers to God in the subjectified sense of love. God is love, I am truth. Those balancing effects that we see throughout marriage, throughout personality types, throughout political dispositions, all stem from this relationship and truth, love and truth. It's in everything and in that trajectory. Now, where does free will come into that? Why do we have that? That free will is exercised in the Garden of Eden. And by the way, that whole rant is basically saying, yes, I see through experience the truth of biblical things, even if it's at the very, just the first chapter, like, whoa, I see this now. And I see the pattern here, and I see it here. I've experienced the sin of pride, and I see what that and why it is there and why it's there, and I can understand it. I daily experience the pull of the sin of going, not that even the sin, but I experience the pull of knowledge of good and evil. That, like, I was actually thinking, like, if you didn't have to deal with people or other people having the control over your time, I'd love to be a pastor. Which is to say, I'd just like to go sit and think and pray.
Hey, come along, man.
I don't think I'd do very well. So yeah, I see that as you're saying, I have experienced that, and it takes me a lot longer time to explain it and to understand it and to absorb it.
Yeah.
Now, how's that play into free will and determinism? If you have a God that creates the Garden of Eden, and God's neighbor says, as soon as you do that, then the first mated pair, they're going to fail. And God's like, nah, they'll be fine. It's going to be okay. They're going to obey for all eternity and all their offspring. And then the neighbor says, well, like, what if their 60 millionth grandchild sins? The whole thing collapses at that point? Again, I can't hold it as literal when I make that equation. That's hard.
Yeah.
Because, okay, so...
You can't hold what as literal?
The story.
The story, okay, yeah.
Because, like, we were just watching a video of Mr. Beast yesterday, and he makes his whole thing off of just giving money away, basically, and filming it. And it just keeps compounding, and he's a billionaire for giving money away.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But they had this competition where this guy could, for $1,000, do the bottle flip with half full of water, and it lands. And every time he does it and lands it, you double your money. If you can do it 7 times... it's pretty exponential, the amount of money. The guy flipped it and only took $2,000. He's like, I'm done. But that exponential risk is what happens when you create 2 people and they create another person, which then creates 2. And your exponential thing of this all failing is inevitable, especially when the first 2 failed. That tells me it's not literal. That tells me this is a story that's always true. That's how I see it. It's always true at every moment, always.
Maybe it's both.
It absolutely could be both.
Yeah.
But again, if I can see where they come to determinism, because if God's going to say, I'm going to do this and I know that it's going to fail, but that's worth it because the deepest value is to have free will. Maybe not the deepest truth, but the deepest value.
Yeah, I don't know if I would verbalize it that way, that it's the deepest value, but it's a necessary value to reach the deepest value.
What is the deepest value?
Well, I would submit that the deepest value, not to just play off one aspect, of the love and truth conversation, but the deepest value is love. That God is...
What is love?
Yeah, well, sounds like a good song. What is love? Baby, don't
Baby,
hurt me.
don't hurt me.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think love, this is I got to return to Calvin at some point, so let's get back to him in a second. Yeah, love is the mutual giving of oneself. Mutual giving. We'll put it that way.
Right,
maybe.
but that requires that there's 2 humans.
That requires that there's what?
2 humans.
Yeah.
And truth and love pre-exist humans in this conversation, essentially. We're talking about where does this all come from?
Yeah.
So we have to talk about it back there before we get here.
Yeah.
So I'll push back a bit there.
Yeah.
So what's deeper than for the value of free will was enough to create all this BS? That's how I see it.
Yeah.
That's the deepest value in God's opinion and my take.
But again, I would say that love, I would still say that.
Oh, there goes that hamstring.
I would still say that free will is a necessary condition of that greater pursuit. And it can't be Like you can't really separate the two in many ways, love and free will, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. 100%. That's I found out very, very quickly. That's where the absolute crossroads between religious, spiritual, and atheism meets. It's right there, because there has to be a ghost in the machine if you're going to think that there's free will. Otherwise, it is just materialistic.
Yeah.
Now, I do believe that we possess free will. I can't quite prove it though. Still.
Yeah. I don't think I can prove it either, nor do I necessarily want to.
I have some good ways of looking at it that we'll get to after we touch on Calvinism and everything else. But my argument at the beginning of talking about free will is that I do think it is the deepest, most important value to God. Love is a result of respecting the freedom of consciousness, to say, I am conscious and I can choose, period.
Yeah, we'll get back to this, because I would just continue to place love as the most fundamental goal that God seeks and is after. Can we get back to Calvin for 1 minute? Okay, let's get back to Calvin, because I want to talk about Calvin. So this little side trip was me using the term Wesleyan, and we were off and running. So all I was saying is that Arminian theology is expressed in people like Methodists, other Wesleyan denominations. Adventism came out of that strand of Protestantism. So Calvin, even though I basically reject his system as a whole, I can appreciate why he developed his system of theology. And that's because he was reacting to, as I understand it, the very kind of transactional, merit-based theology and religious thinking of the Roman Catholic tradition.
Oh, okay.
So Calvin, and even to a greater degree, Martin Luther, was very much responding to a sort of shame-based, guilt-ridden religious experience that placed a premium on performance. And so Calvin, and again, even more so Luther, who was overwhelmed by a guilty conscience. Like he was so Luther, yeah. He was
What was he so guilty about?
Just not performing the
not
right,
being able to check all the boxes.
not being able to check all the boxes. There's a famous story about him on his knees on Pilate's staircase in Rome, where you were required to kind of, as a way of performing penance, like just flagellating yourself and like going up the stairs and whipping
flagellating.
Yourself. Yeah. Gotcha. The G is important there.
Flagellating.
Just the sense that you are never good enough, that you never did enough, that you could never have the assurance.
It's baked into the bread of Catholicism at that time, especially, that you will never be good enough. Make sure you keep trying.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Holding acceptance back as a means of pulling.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's rough.
Luther was I would say it's baked into the human DNA, but that's another story. I don't want to go down a side street. So Luther and then Calvin were so mortified by this system of thinking that in order to feel a sense of peace, they basically put all the onus on God. So in order to remove any sense that they contributed to their acceptance, they said, okay, we're taking it out of our hands and we're putting it in God's hands. So they've developed basically what some people make a distinction between monergism and synergism. Monergism, mono, and so it's one work where it's all God's work. Synergism is we work together, so to speak. So from out of that agenda flowed everything else for Calvin. So So if it's all God's work, then it must mean that God determines everything.
Right. God caused, like, kind of like did the Egyptians feel that way in some sense? Like, if it happens, God made it happen.
Most, from my understanding, most religious thinking in the ancient Near East basically ascribed everything to God. It's the God or gods. So what it was is like, okay, so even the act of faith for Calvin must be God's work in me, because if faith is something I do, then how can I ever feel like I have enough faith?
Right.
So it's all God. So Calvinism is most famously kind of explained in this acronym called TULIP, TULIP. Now, Calvin himself didn't write the acronym, but
I'm imagining construction paper cutouts on a grade school wall.
Yeah, exactly. But it was born out of like something called the Synod of Dort, which was a little after Calvin, as they tried to kind of like articulate the theology of Calvin. But TULIP stands for T, total depravity. So human beings are so utterly depraved that we can never do anything good of ourselves.
Okay.
U stands for unconditional election, meaning God unconditionally chooses those whom he's going to save. And then L stands for limited atonement, meaning those that God has elected, Jesus died on their behalf. He didn't die for anybody else. I stands for irresistible grace. Those God has elected and died for, he then sheds his grace upon them, and they cannot resist it. And then P stands for perseverance, or perseverance of the saints, which means those that God has elected, he's died for, he's drawn to himself, they will never turn away from a saving faith.
Do the Calvinists believe, like, what do they believe a soul is? So does God just have these and can throw them away and use them as he needs? Because that's what the resulting, like, well, what about all these subcontinent Indians for hundreds of thousands or whatever
they're
years?
Just not saved, probably.
That we're just throwing cannon fodder, you know? Like,
yeah. So again, this is a way of placing all of the onus on God rather than human beings, as a way to escape the anxiety of feeling saved or not. So if it's based on a human system of merit or work, I will never have the assurance that I've done enough, I've believed enough, etc. So again, to take it out of humanity's hands and undermine and pull the rug out from any sense of uncertainty when it comes to my acceptance with God, we'll just put it all in God's hands.
See, that's the thing. Like, if you're one inclined for certainty, then you're one inclined for determinism. Is that, okay, certainty is going to be more likely if everything's determined. If you have the idea that free will is of maximal importance, nothing's certain. Now,
but I would say so I use the term reformed because that's also a term that's used. Calvinist, reformed, Calvinist.
Right.
I think they would prioritize security over anything else.
That's a real self-centered way of thinking.
Well, that's what you and I might say, but
I mean, you sacrifice yourself for something. And if it's just to extend your life and your offspring, that's still a very satanic, self-centered thing. Is it you and your existence, or is it truth? Like, truth, no matter what, is God. And to relate to that relating to that in God's image means that you relate to truth and love, which brings on a whole wagon load of, okay, that might be true, but this might not be the best way to deal with that. What's the best way to deal with this being true, and share that and be graceful over time with people who can't handle all this truth right now? And there's a lot more responsibility and thought that has to be engaged with if you're respecting free will. there's a lot more dirt, there's a lot more destruction, there's a lot more ugliness, but it tells you that this is free. Not free, but it's this process is actually an alive process that has life in it. So I have a couple analogies that help me start to understand the shape of free will, in a sense, how I think about it. If it's a good time to go into those, you think?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I would just maybe, again, just for one last little defense of Calvin. So,
But you're not a Calvinist.
I'm not a Calvinist whatsoever.
But you like to defend him.
But no, I try to understand why such a system of thinking was very, like, I very much sympathize with a sense of like deep-rooted sense of shame and guilt that I don't want to experience. So like this was pervasive within the religious thinking of the day. The famous expression, and this again was more Luther than Calvin, but there was a famous Catholic monk who was raising money to help renovate St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, in the Vatican City at this time. And now whether he actually said this or not, it was at least, reported that he did. He would say stuff like, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. So you basically said, hey, give us money, because then...
I think that was Creflo Dollar.
No comment. But it's basically like you bought your way out of purgatory. And so this deep sense of guilt and shame was just overwhelming. So Calvin says, I'm out.
Right.
I'm out. So here's a system that helps me escape that.
And so is that theorized, or is that documented? Like that's why he came up with that? Because when I look at the Bible, it's like, if this guy can do all that, he must know the future, which means he determines everything.
Yeah.
That's a more pragmatic approach to that end result.
I don't think you'll find anywhere that Calvin explicitly says, this is why I developed this system.
It's because a breadcrumb trail of theology.
Yeah, I think it's fairly well established that the Protestant Reformation of Calvin, Luther was very much a reaction to the guilt and shame of the Roman Catholic system.
So if I was to interact with Calvinists now and shared that theory on why they still believe that, they would probably reject that and say, no, it's more so because of this pragmatic issue. So is it like an explanation that makes sense of why we don't hold it, that the people that hold it would say, well, that's not why we hold it?
Yeah, I would say probably, I would guess a modern day Calvinist would say we believe it because it's biblical.
Right.
That's,
and they'd have some form of proof texting in a sense.
Yeah. I think you'd find some, so, I'm part of my profession, my academic training is a historian. So the challenge with doing history is that doing history can very easily tempt one to think that they can explain away something just by understanding its history. Like when you historicize anything, you're essentially, in some ways, delegitimizing it. And so for me, I have to remind myself that just because I can explain something's history, it doesn't mean that it's not valid, right? And so one could both point to a historical reason or the historical development of an idea or a theology or a religion. That doesn't mean that it's not true. It's simply saying, okay, here's the human development, historical development of this idea. So all that is to say is I think you could find a Calvinist who would acknowledge the history, but still say, yeah, but I think it's also scriptural. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, I want to get back to what you want to get to because I don't want to. I don't want to take it too far afield.
So let's see. There's a character analogy of free will. That's a pretty short one. That's easy. So the fact that we hold a word that means what character means that if you believe in character being formed and existing, you, in a sense, believe that there's free will because there's no ability to develop a character in a determined system. There's a summary of choices that then tell you about a person that you then assign character. That's one thing for me that says that we're very attuned to character and the sum result of observed choices that we then say this person is of this disposition. Then we judge on that. And that, I guess, Calvinists still could maybe say, well, that's just God determined that they would be of that character. But the fact that we emotionally experience and hold that, and that character can change. I believe I've gone through character change to some degree just through experience and realizing through observing someone who I did not like, who a lot of people said, you're very much like that person. There's like, thank you.
Not good.
That doesn't feel good, but thank you, and give me a few years, right? So there's something there about free will in that understanding.
Well, I maybe I could insert here. I listened to a podcast a few years ago with Sam Harris, who is arguing for.
Did you listen to the debates between him and Peterson? They did like 3 of them.
No, this was Jordan Peterson more recently.
Really? No. Oh, it was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. No, this was on his podcast. And, he argues for determinism from a biological perspective, obviously. But if that's the best argument, what I heard him say was basically determinism must be true because we don't have absolute freedom. And essentially
we have consequences.
Well, what I mean by that, what he meant by that was because our choices are limited. Like he said, think of a movie right now. This is the example he used. Think of a movie right now. And he said, there's a very good chance that there's only a limited number of movies that you would be able to access because you don't know the rest of the movies. And it would be funneled based on your limited experience and knowledge. And he said, there's only so many movies that you could have thought of right now. And so what I heard him saying, and I might be wrong, is basically because humans don't have absolute freedom, it must therefore mean we don't have any freedom, which to me is kind of a huge leap in logic. And if that's like the best argument you can make, that, well, biologically, genetically, there's only so many possibilities that we could, reach potentially. It's like, just because we don't have limitless like possibilities doesn't mean we don't have any part of
that problem that he's outlining goes away with enough peaceful time. Technology will advance. We will get to a point where we can manipulate matter at a very fundamental level, where we'll be able to, basically create this in a second by the manipulation of matter, like arrange the copper ions to do this and whatever. It's going to get to that point if you just look at the trajectory, and we'll get to the point where we're going to start figuring out like what's going on with our telomeres. Why are we dying so early? How can we extend our life? How can we build houses with, a 3D printing thing in a day? And we're going to get to a much different place if we don't blow ourselves up. So it's more so the discussion of the spirituality and personal disposition of nations, people, country, all that is a very important thing that we guide ourselves, not blowing up, and maybe get to that point of having that absolute, freedom in a sense that he's talking about. Well, I don't know that's a good thing to aim for even, but I do think given enough time, it could get there.
Yeah, I mean, when I use the term absolute freedom, I mean in the sense that God, if God does exist.
But Sam Harris doesn't.
No, but what I'm saying is that the type of absolute freedom that I heard him talking about was literally a being that has every single possibility or option at their disposal. And for me, I am a finite contingent being that does not have access to, like, I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything.
So he's saying unless you're God,
basically,
the description of that's really Sam Harris's description of God, of what he would believe in. And he believes there's no God. So he believes that we are not gods. And so there's no free will.
Unless you're God, there's really no literal free will is what he's saying. That's how I understand what he's saying, which I think is just kind of silly.
Well, it seems like a different road than the actual conversation of free will, in my opinion. It seems like,
well,
yeah.
But what he's saying is, again, using the movie analogy, he would say, think of a movie. And he would say, let's just say you've seen 300 movies in your lifetime, maybe. Let's just put it out there. You've seen 300 movies, but even there, you probably will not think of a movie you saw 15 years ago when you were half awake. Right. He's like, probably what will happen is most likely there'll be a subset of movies that you have seen maybe in the last month or whatever. And there's a good chance that you will choose a movie that you just recently saw. So you don't have absolute freedom to come up with any movie in your mind. It will probably be highly determined by a set of circumstances that lead you to this particular movie that you don't have true freedom over.
Yeah, see, it seems like we're talking about, do we have the freedom to truly choose? Not, do we have the freedom to choose whatever we want?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
A limiting of possibility because they're not within your grasp is not to say that there's not the ability to choose what is within your grasp.
And that's what I would say, and I agree with. But it seems like he's conflating the two.
Yeah, that doesn't seem,
which doesn't make sense to me.
Interesting. Yeah, I always have a hard time hanging on when he's going places. I'm like, all right, let's put this on half speed and really put it in 4-wheel drive low. And all right, so there's the character analogy of free will that if you believe that character is something that you can perceive, that then people had the freedom to choose to get to that character in a sense. I believe that. I can't necessarily stringently and philosophically defend that as much, but there's a sense of this. It's getting the feel, right? The next thing that I see is at what levels of reality do we believe that there might be will or the possibility of will involved? So humans, I do believe we have the ability to choose. Like, I could reach for your phone right now and break it if I really wanted to. I could try, right? You might jump over and defend and descend into some weird. We have the freedom to do that, and we could, but we're not. And there is all this freedom of choices, but we understand that what I choose to do, I have enough at this level of reality. I have enough intelligence to project what could come. Consequences. I have a dim flashlight into the future. Essentially, the future doesn't exist. Past doesn't exist, in my opinion. Time doesn't exist. Different conversation. But so we have this ability to choose different. Like, it's a novel. Choose your next, and then go to the different page. Now, at the next level down, do animals have free will? From owning pets and watching animals, I absolutely think they have free will. They just exist in a highly emotional state with less articulate intelligence, but they're still gravitating towards different situations and choosing to gravitate. Now, you can still argue that the result sum of all the billions of interactions that create that horse into being still will always choose this. And that's the argument that I can't get past, is like, well, let's rewind time. Do I do something differently? All things considered being exactly the same, I will do the same thing. There's nothing to tell me scientifically that I wouldn't. Now, spiritually, that's a different conversation, but we have to figure out how to be able to say that there is a spiritual realm, and that's what we're working towards. So good. Now let's take that down to a next level, down to like a protozoa or a some kind of bug, insect, virus, or whatever. They're still responding to input and following. Now, to me, I start to look at laws and effects at the different levels of reality that relate to the ability of there to be will. So at our level, I can break the law, and the effects of breaking the law are not immediate. That I might have months or years before I'm caught for choosing to murder or whatever, or speeding, or I can break the laws and the fabric of our reality gets a little out of balance because I'm not behaving within those boundaries. But it's not going to tip over immediately. It's not going to happen immediately. As you go down in those levels of reality and you start to get through, you start to get down to the chemical level. There's laws at the chemical level and there's reactions. There is an awareness at that level of what's going on, but as a chemical thing starts to happen, this goes this way, the reaction is very quick, and then so the laws are not enforced, but the laws come into effect more quickly as you go into more simple, and as you get more complex, the laws and the ability to choose outside of those laws is more elastic. So within our reality, you might speed on the way home, not get caught. And I'll guarantee you're going to go a mile over the speed limit. Laws will be broken today by Shawn Brace.
Absolutely. Momentarily. Stay tuned.
It doesn't immediately, so we have a higher degree of things to choose and results that don't necessarily come to bear immediately. As you work down towards getting down to, let's say, an atomic level. At an atomic level, we still have truth, an objectified center of the atom that has protons and neutrons. And then outside of that, we have electrons. And that's how these things, and there's laws that govern these things. And if those laws are broken, it's just absolutely immediate that there's not as much this kind of choosing and everything going on, but there's laws that regulate it and the speed at which those laws come into effect. And there's a both truth and relationship part of that equation where the electron is both everywhere and nowhere at once. So it's this very odd thing that seems to be the kind of things holding together, the relationship between the points of objectified truth that all hold it together. It's a fabric very similar. But to me, consciousness arises as those things get more complex. You get into a chemical level, it's more complex and more relationship than at the atomic level. Now, interestingly, the deeper you go in the reality of relationship, when you do break a law, the consequences are immediate and go up the chain very dramatically. And the interesting thing about nuclear fission, the breaking of relationship has much more fallout than fusion. Bringing relationship together is far more beneficial, but way harder. And if you mess with laws at a nuclear level, fusion has a massive benefit into our reality, where fission has a massive pulling of a part of relationship that has a detrimental effect in our reality, but we have to be very careful and control it, but you still get this, So there's a way of looking at relationship, consciousness, laws, and will to choose within that structure that starts to shed a little bit of light on how I understand will. Okay.
Man, you're wicked smart. What have you...
I am one of the dumbest people that can appear smart because I've never read. The last complete book I've read years and years and years. I can only listen to conversations where there's someone who doesn't understand and someone who understands, if I read, it's a battle between the voice in my head distracting me and me trying to listen to the words that I'm articulating in my head. When I read, there's two conversations going on. I hear the words that I see that I'm translating, and I'm trying to get my head to shut up. And it just... So there's just over and over and over, I listen to things like Sam Harris and Peterson and philosophy, and I don't get it the first time. But I hear the words, and I'm like, what's that mean? And then I go, and then I go listen again, and
So maybe what I would say is that what you just explained was awesome and amazing. I am probably a lot just more simplistic. And this is where I would appeal to, we talked before about critical realism. Maybe that was the thing up there you were trying to remember. I don't remember if that was it. But
something's up there.
Something's up there. Let us know what it is, listeners. And this is the realist part of me, is that in order for me to reject the idea of free will, you are asking me to just completely deny the realist in me. Like it just
now. What's the definition of realist?
Somebody who believes that there is a direct correspondence between what is out there and how I perceive what's out there.
I'm a realist, absolute realist.
Yeah.
Hardline realist, I would imagine.
So, again, I've described myself as a critical realist. So I believe that there's some interrogation of my perceptions that needs to take place as well.
Absolutely.
So there is a distance between what is there and what I see is there.
We will use our desires to deceive us into forming our reality as we want it.
Yeah. But in order to deny free will, you are really asking me to deny.
It's like a dismissal of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think the determinist would probably push back against that idea, of course, whether it's a Christian determinist or a philosophical determinist. But yeah, I think it does that. But it also just,
or at least you and I can feel that if we were to adopt that ideology. Someone holding that ideology might perceive it in a very, very different manner. And I might have to just accept that that's the best way that works for you. And that's a pragmatic theory of truth. Have fun.
Exactly. So, but again, for me, it's too big of an ask to say what seems to be reality is something that is not true. Like the idea of free will seems to correspond with my perception of reality. So it just seems like,
it's a correspondence theory of truth.
Yeah. It corresponds with my experience, what I've observed, what I've gone through. In my own experience, I have had to actually exercise choice. It seems to me that is hard to deny.
The denial of truth and the something about being able to uncomfortably be honest with yourself really breaks through an emotional smokescreen of reality. And really understanding that there's something in really understanding how wrong you are in so many ways that when you can just admit that to yourself, you can place things in like, oh, I think this is true, and I'll act upon that, but I will be open to change that if I'm presented an argument for that. And there's something different about that version of me than the previous version of me that produces smiles and joy and peace in the people I'm responsible in giving myself to. And those results, that's it. Which again might be a pragmatic theory of truth, but I do find that the practice results in, there's a degree of pragmatism in there, but it's also, all right, here's a theory, let's test it in reality. This turns out to be true consistently. It's not just that it's beneficial. So pragmatic theory of truth to me is like, all right, there's different ways of testing a truth. Is the truth pragmatic? It does. Okay, good. Is it correspondence? Yep. Is it this? Yep. So maybe there's different levels of ways to interact with truth and a multi-footed stool to balance truth on then. Okay, that's a good way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Progress.
I'm down with that. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more weird analogy.
Okay.
And this is my Dyson sphere analogy. This was the first kind of, I don't know how profound this is, other than I could have been just really ignorant at the time and it felt profound. I don't know.
We'll have a vote. Let's have a vote from our.
Let's not. I want to retain my confidence. But okay, so there's this. So if we think, are you aware of what a Dyson sphere is? Not the vacuum.
I'm not.
But okay. No. So in science circles and science fiction circles, there is the discussion of, and NASA is looking for potential stars that might have Dyson spheres. But a Dyson sphere, it might have been Ray Kurzweil that predicted this or thought up, whatever. But it's essentially something that assists a society, a planet, a culture, whatever, could get to a point where they're technologically advanced enough to be able to capture the energy of a star by some type of sphere thing and holy cow, we've got limitless power now. And so it's the trajectory of thought of technological advancement that could end up in. And if this whole universe has been around for billions of years, the potential is there. So let's say we get a Dyson sphere that powers a quantum computer that can map every known bit of matter and its way of laws of interacting, throughout all the universe. We get it. Let's say we install it on a Commodore 128, because that's great. And we can type in, if we do this, what happens? Because it knows all, if we're determined, right? If we're determined and we can map all of that, which technically is a possible thing, given enough time, then what do we do with that? All of a sudden, we've essentially technically created a God that we can ask a question to, know the trajectory of it, because we've taken our little beam of light that projects into the future to know what's coming, and we've magnified it to just an immense degree on a material truth, deterministic. There's no ghost in the machine. It's all determined, right? So we know, all right, we all need to, drive electric cars and not eat beef or whatever. So then we're like, okay, great. So we go around with this new gospel, and we say, you guys got to do this. We've been told by the sphere that, in the quantum computer, like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't. Go away. Well, we have to for the best result. And if you don't, well, then we're going to have to start a war, and we're going to have to go. All we've done with technically creating the extent of our technology, what we've created then in that scenario is essentially a God. And when we get that, we relate to it in the same way that we do with God already. Well, God said this. We have it here in the Bible. Look, can't you see it? Why don't you behave accordingly? To me, the trajectory of our collective experience on Earth resembles far more of the situation of us trying to believe that it's all determined and we can figure out exactly what to do and how to do it and tell everyone else to do it. But it all just constantly blows up in our face. Again, free will is more realistic than determinism in that sense.
Yeah. Are you, maybe this is a side note, but are you kind of implying that we've created God in our image in that scenario?
I mean, not in our image, but we've created something all-knowing.
Yeah.
And what happens if you get something all-knowing? You then try and tell people about it. And hey, I have good intentions. And the thing that's all-knowing has told us, with our good intentions, of course, that this is the best way to behave. So come on, guys. And this is the trajectory of governments. This is the trajectory of religions. This is the trajectory of families. We all do that. We use everything at our disposal to project where this will go and the best way to do it to a better result. But inevitably, every single time, monkey wrenches fall in there, and it's all blown up because of free will. And you don't get beauty, you don't get hot without experiencing cold, you don't get good without experiencing bad. We're left at this central thing of, it's not that I don't think I believe that there's sin. I think there's selfishness. And I don't know that I believe that there's a Satan. I believe that there's us. And then there's the ability to relate to truth through love. And that's a much more ambiguous and complex way of looking at the reality that we can't perceive and trying to balance and understand what to do moving forward than if it had all been objectified into a book that I could read and follow. So again, I still, these are three little things that tell me about will, just within our, in our actions, that if this is all determined, yeah, you then run into these other issues of like Phineas Kane and the guy in the military that started shooting people from the clock tower. Or no, wait, it was a pedophile. He was growing a tumor, and it was pushing against a certain part of his brain, and he started having these things. And
You're talking about Phineas Gage was the other guy.
Phineas Gage is the guy who got the spike through the head, cut off his frontal lobe, basically a lobotomy, and he started just acting on everything that came into his head, and he had no filter. But there was this famous psychological story of this guy that had a tumor pressing a certain part of his brain. The guy from the clock tower is a very similar thing. That he got up in the clock tower, took out 7 to 20 people. I don't know, military guy on a base, and he had left a suicide note that said, "I've been experiencing a pressing darkness over time. I think there's something wrong with me. Please do an autopsy on my head." I might be convoluting the two stories. Yeah. But they did a thing later, and they found he had a mass of a tumor pressing against a certain part that created this darkness in him. And, so in that case, that's outside of his, that a court would look at that a little differently than, because they could remove the tumor, and then the will to do these things is gone, so you don't need to punish this person.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
So, what other ways are there to really understand will, free will, determinism, and relate them to how you paint a picture of the God that we all think may or may not be there? And how do we, because will introduces sin, and you have this complexity of I'm not going to believe in God because how could there be a God if my kid's dead? And, where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
I've got questions.
You got questions. I don't have answers. I think, we've talked about kind of the philosophical foundations to the idea of free will, from a Christian perspective, such that I have, certainly there are theological arguments, there are scriptural arguments to any degree that those have validity. But even from a philosophical perspective, I think we have made a case for, I don't know if it's a strong case, but a case for free will.
The other thing I did have, six. There's 6 different philosophical stances on free will that I haven't even read yet.
Fire those off quickly.
Let's see how fast I can do this. Free will and determinism. Number 1, libertarianism, not to be confused with the political disposition. Yeah. The main idea, and I had AI explain this to a 10-year-old, so hopefully I'll get it.
Hopefully I'll understand it.
The main idea, people have free will and our choices are not determined by prior events. Okay, example, you choose to eat an apple instead of a banana simply because you want to and nothing else is causing that choice. We are liberal. We are free to do what we do. Okay. Number 2, hard determinism, the polar opposite, I imagine here. Yeah. Main idea, every event, including human actions, is determined by previous events according to natural laws. So free will does not exist. There's no ghost in the machine. So if there is free will, there's something more than just the cells. And when you get into surgery and when they put you under and the microtubules where they think consciousness actually exists and they don't know really what they're doing when they put people under for surgery, which is one of those things we also don't know what gravity is. Yeah. And we don't know what we're doing when we knock people out. To me, that's another all right, there's something in there that,
something's going on.
So soft determinism, I'm imagining this is a middle ground, or compatibilism. Main idea, determinism and free will are compatible. While our actions are determined by prior events, we still act freely when we follow our own desires and intentions. So everything up to this point was determined, but every choice you make is still jumping off of everything that came before into the next route, which still, compatibilism to me still seems like free will in a sense.
Yeah, it seems like anytime you have any ounce of free will, it's just free will.
Right. If
but I think
if it's there at all, it's there.
But I think I don't think I would be like a libertarianist, because that seems to deny the reality of choices that affect choices down the line, like character formation and habit formation is very much a part of the equation, I would say. And it seems like libertarianism denies that to a large degree. So
yeah, I would say we're constantly a result of our choices and experiences.
So those choices and experiences will, by definition, limit the range of my future choices, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what compatibilism is.
Yeah, I would say I am. I believe libertarianism, but I can only articulately defend hard determinism. So in the same way that I emotionally feel that there's a God, I cannot articulately defend that enough to where I use my articulate intelligence to adjust my emotional state. That's another conversation of, is belief a choice, or is it like falling in love?
But I mean, you just acknowledge that there is only a certain range of possible choices in any given moment based on the experience I've had leading up to this moment, right?
And like, how would the rubber meet the road in that scenario?
I mean, let me think of an example. Well, let's just say you've developed a real desire for black coffee. You go in the Starbucks.
You got to make it real careful to get it good. But Chet Williams.
You go in the Starbucks. Because you have formed this taste for black coffee, there's a very, very low possibility that you will choose a different type of coffee.
You become predictable as an accumulation of your choices.
Yeah.
I wouldn't deny that for a second.
So I think that's what, as I understand it, that's where it would be a little different from libertarianism, which kind of...
Oh, that you're kind of laden with the result, the accumulative result of the effects of your choices.
Yeah. Or another analogy is, because of the choices,
and you're influenced as you move forward in those choices.
Yeah.
So you're not completely free. You're being influenced by your past choices.
So no offense, but you will never win the Boston Marathon, right?
Not after that run yesterday. Boy.
Exactly, because you have made choices over the 40 whatever
past
years.
My peak, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And those choices have led to this. So you aren't completely free. You are somewhat your future.
But I can try.
You can try, but good luck.
Oh, yeah, sure. But the fact is, I could try.
You could try for sure, but no matter how much you try.
But that feels like the Harris argument. It's like, but to say I'm not free to do that is to say that I'm only free if I'm guaranteed to accomplish. Yeah. I can accomplish the process of trying that.
But you'll not win it.
Right. I get that. But as an effect on will, results are
different than choice.
Than choice. And to make the argument on determinism or free will based on the ability to achieve results is misleading to me.
I think, again, I would still say that there is probably a very narrow potential that you would even will or want to win the Boston Marathon.
But that's the beauty of humans.
Yeah.
That you get these outliers, like the video that starts out with a massively overweight guy that can barely walk. That by the end of the 2 minutes is like, I actually did something that was pretty much impossible. And then we all go, whoa, maybe we can.
Yeah.
You know?
But I just think the possibility that you, Trent Bell, because of the choices you have made prior to this, and the genetics you have, you will probably in your lifetime never desire to win the Boston Marathon.
Probably not. No.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's just kind of the compatibilist perspective, is that, you know, there are
the
limited...
compatibilist kind of brings in like the restraint of your choices limiting your ability to make other choices in a sense. Okay.
Yeah.
I can accept that is true, but I think it's incomplete in a sense. It's not enough for me to dismiss that I can choose to try anything.
Yeah. Do you have two more though? Wasn't there two more?
So, and we got 15 minutes before a real hard out for you. So keep that in mind.
Yes, sir.
So soft determinism, which is also compatibilism. And then we have in there indeterminism.
Indeterminism. Yeah.
Main idea, not all events are determined by previous events, which I somewhat agree on, but also am limited by the material understanding. Because they are, but they're not. I don't know. Some events, including human actions, are random or influenced by random factors, which I believe that. There will be random things.
What does random mean? But anyway.
Yeah, just things out of left field, but still, it comes down to I get to choose to try no matter what.
Yeah.
I think that's where this is helpful for me. This is where it comes down to. I care about free will enough, at least that I get to try. That's all I care.
Yeah.
Not that I'm guaranteed. Like, I want equality of opportunity, not guaranteed equality of outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, you're a libertarian politically, it sounds like as well.
Probably. There's a lot of weird things out there about that. Okay, now number 5 is fatalism. Main idea, the future is fixed and inevitable, regardless of human actions. That feels like hard determinism to me.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know how there's much
I guess
difference.
It's more of assigning a will to the universe or God to say, this is the end result that will happen, and you're all on a path to this end result, which... if you give that to someone who could imagine an ideology that tells them this is the path, then that's pretty dangerous, in my opinion. Not on board with fatalism.
No. 2 thumbs down.
Now we have, for our last one, existentialism, especially Jean-Paul Sartre's version.
Yes.
If I said that wrong.
Yeah, something like that.
Main idea, humans have absolute freedom and are responsible for their choices, creating their essence through actions. I believe that. I believe we have absolute freedom to choose to try.
Yeah.
Now, guaranteed results? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So how is it that I'm both an existentialist and a hard determinist and a libertarian-ish-ism, whatever?
I don't know. Maybe because you recognize that you can't fit everything into neat categories.
Yeah, there's such complexity within the management of consciousness that you don't get a free pass to say God's will be done, and I have no part in adjusting my desires or the version of myself that I have in my head. I don't have a responsibility for adjusting that. It is the result of God's will. That's where I find that hard determinism is dangerous, but also materialistically accurate. It's like, okay, we can't quantify a soul in a person. We just know that there's this weird thing, consciousness, that we experience and have the freedom to choose in that. That's undeniable. But it does not guarantee results, and we have no way of scientifically, materialistically proving that free will does not exist or that we're all determined either. I think the thing you have to come away with from the free will argument is that you are responsible to corral your own desires and to hold your own perceptions with a degree of skepticism because of your desires, and to determine and process what you observe through experience and teachings and established truths of others to accept the responsibility of making the choices that have the best outcome while putting your own desires in the proper place. And beyond that, there's no answer that you can give someone. It's still this ambiguous thing that I can have ways of understanding and little mental games that I play to keep me thinking that I have free will when I still have the ability to choose, but also that you can't quite escape your situation. You're always jumping off from that platform. Now, you have different platforms that you can aim at. Great. Aim for the right or better platform. And then it's the accumulation of all those experiences over time that hopefully we can accumulate and share with others to help people jump towards the right platforms.
Well put.
So that is a pretty good encapsulation of, while working from no God to believing potentially there's a God, to kind of give an idea of how should I hold this idea of free will? Am I more of a determinist, a libertarian, all of that? I think, is there anything else that you'd illuminate within that path of thinking?
No, I'm wondering how all this relates to me looking for a house to buy.
You're free to choose to live on the streets.
What I'm struggling with, this is a whole other topic, Trent, and hopefully when this is released, I'm living in a nice, cozy
in a house, and the kids will have bedrooms.
Yeah. Does God have any involvement in me finding a house?
All right. Let's see if I can answer that for Pat. Let's pretend you're coming to me for spiritual advice for saying it. And I mean, okay, at my position where I'm currently at, this is an interesting exercise.
It's something I've actually been wrestling with, because like we put an offer on a house, and we didn't get the house. And my wife says, well, God must have a better house for us. It's like, okay, well, is that true? Or...
I've been through that process and watched people go and look at a house that had, as they discovered, it used to have mold in it, but now didn't. And it had prevented the owner from renting it for like 6 months. A huge loss to the owner. But now was perfect for these people. And so in their mind, they painted it as like, oh, God held this for us.
Yeah.
Oh, at the detriment of this owner?
Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
Yeah. It's like the person who didn't get on the plane that crashed. It's like,
okay.
Oh, God must not have wanted me to be on the plane.
I don't think the beauty of our life is guaranteed by the will of God. And if it were, we would be like the baby alligator that's helped out of the egg. We would fall apart. We are responsible for every choice, and we are responsible for reigning in our own desires. And as you carefully move forward, as you look for truth, and as your articulate intelligence and your ability to perceive into the future increases, your chances of survival and accommodating your situation exponentially increase. You and I are already two of the richest people in the world statistically. We're in the top 1% of, if you factor the whole population. We have nothing to complain about, yet we complain about the 1%. This is crazy. And since you're coming to me for spiritual advice, God's voice and will and for us is only expressed through truths and the example of the embodiment of God's character within a human that was here on earth in Christ, according to the belief structure that you follow and that I hold in question. And that, I think that the truth is that there needs to be pastors in Portland, and that there's an organization that does that, and it's over time going to be worked out, but it might be complex and uncomfortable for a time.
Yeah.
That's all you got.
I'm down with that. I don't know. My struggle is that, from a theistic perspective, there is a history of ascribing God's providence to events, right?
I avoid that at all costs. I really do.
I had another friend who I greatly respect, who's a very deeply committed Christian, who basically said that as well. It's like, I'm not in the game of ascribing, but I have to deny a lot of the normative picture that the Bible presents, because there's no doubt that
if there's a brother sick and you pray in faith, he gets healed. And that puts God on a couch watching a faith-o-meter. Your son's dying.
Yeah, well,
come on, I have enough faith. Bing, he's healed. Okay.
Even the simple incarnation of Christ is God's intervention in human history.
I just listened to a podcast from a guy interviewing a guy who came across as, if I've ever seen someone that seems demon possessed, this guy's it. Not violent, not, but just looked like something was inhabiting his body that was very uncomfortable. And the things and the story that individual told from a classical Greek perspective take on what Christ was in his opinion from reading was unsettling and disturbing, but also had an immense correlation to the Garden of Eden story with the consistency of reality that I've experienced as far as the, we'll have to get into this another time, is really, really kind of interesting and had some truth and error mixed in it, which is the most dangerous thing sometimes.
So I guess just where I am is that I live in this tension where I do believe in the providence of God, that God does intervene in human history, but I am hesitant to be dogmatic about how or when he does today.
Yeah, and your personality and your role within society and your gender role falling into spectrum stereotypes, just so I don't get canceled, is going to greatly affect, Camille's going to be far more likely to, God has a plan and we'll be okay. As in, she's behind the protective plow in front, that with that disposition, you have to be more trusting because you are more vulnerable and you rely on, and you're in the position of being that plow out front of trying to, make it happen through
So what
God's.
you're saying is she doesn't have greater theological insight. She's just a woman.
Strike that from the record. No, I think she has the appropriate theological insight to balance out your perspective. And she's both right and you're both right.
Yeah. Wow.
And,
You sound
those
like
two together will be the tension where the truth is in the middle.
Thank you, Pastor Trent, for bringing clarity to my questions. No, this is great.
Let us
pray.
All right. Well, you got a hard out in 4 minutes,
yes,
so
indeed.
We're doing good. Next one, you're gonna have to run, so let's just figure out between us when the next one is, and I'll do some trajectory for the next discussions to get these general ideas kind of patted down and start to move closer to more spiritual terms, typical spiritual terms. So
cool.
Great. Awesome. And let's be in touch soon and let's check back in and blah, blah, blah. So thanks.
Sweet.